story, okay? A few years ago, I had a class of boys who couldn't hold on to them. But 1 year I did this. Rabbi Tzekhan doesn't want me to do it. I would like to do it, but he's the boss. I made copies of the Maimer, and I put each boy's name on it, and I took it back from the Bachram after each day. Then when they would fill out these sheets, I would staple it to the back of the Maimer. So the Maimer was a stack this big with 41 staples in it. You know what I'm saying? And that the idea was at the end of the year they're going to have the Maimer with all the questions and the answers. And when I offered it to the Bachram at the end of the year, the Bachram said, you can put it in Shemus for me if you want. Or maybe 1 or 2 Bachram wanted it. The idea is that you should learn Chassidus. I mean, that's the idea. So I give you these sheets. I'd like you to keep them. Put them in your sefer. This is the review of the Maimer. I'm not going to punish you if you don't. I'd like you to keep them. I'd like you to have a sefer that you bring every day to school, which is already a big madrege. But the way I grade you for showing up, and I grade you for paying attention. If you come to class and you sleep, or you have some bacham in the yeshiva have Achei Temimim disease. Downstairs they have Talmidim and Achei Temimim. And the average amount of time they sit in a shir is 5 minutes. So we take bets. You know, can you stay for 6? Can you stay for 7? Little. There's bacham like this over here also. You just never see him. I grade you by coming. I grade you by staying awake. I grade you by paying attention. That's how I grade you. And I'm nice about it. I don't give you bad marks like you really are bad, which is very hard to do in Achei Temimim. Everybody's wonderful. So that's the story. But I'd like you to write the answers to the questions and save the sheets. Question 82 lists the 5 steps of Bina we discussed in order. Here we go. In Hebrew, Hasaga, Hey, Shin, Gimel, Hey. It's a 0.3, so be careful.
Which way is Gimel?
Wow.
Think. Which way is Gimel?
That it's the second half of the parenthesis rather than the first half. Thank you, Meir Shimon. Meir Shleim, Shlita. The Hasaga, Hey, Shin, Gimel, Hey. That's number 1. Number 2, Tfisa. Taf, Pei, Yud, Samach, Hey. That's the second one. Number 3, Iyun, Ayin, Yud, Vav, Langen. Or what's your first name? Is that right?
Yeah, I'm gonna get it.
You're gonna.
Iyun is spelled with 2 nuns?
With Ayin, Yud, Vav, Langen. One nun.
Oh, you added that.
Harashmu, Chal B'Shtam Shlita, come ahead. Number 4, Havchona, huh? Ayin, Yud, Vav, Langen. Havchona, Hey, Beis, Ches, Nun, Hey. Havchona, Hey, Beis, Ches, Nun, Hey. And number 5, Havona, Hey, Beis, Nun, Hey. 5 words. 5 words. Hasaga, Tfisa, Iyun, Havchona, Havona. And I think that's the correct order of the 5. Okay? Now, first let's do a translation of the 5 words, and you'll include that in question 82. And then questions 83, 84, 85, 86, 87 go over each one in specific. Hasaga means to reach. Tfisa means to grasp. Iyun means to examine. Havchana means to discern. D-I-S-C-E-R-N, which means to separate. And Havana means to understand. Chatz you went to school? Huh? Okay, then I have no problem. Oy baza hab nicht getayis.
Was 87? 87.
I'm going to go over them in detail.
The last one. Number 5.
Havana, to understand. Havana, hey base, nun hey, to understand. Van Halen, the Vikings write how to write. That's not a right. What can I do?
We're all dyslexic.
Huh? We're all dyslexic. It didn't stop from building ships. Okay, now 83. Explain the first. The first means to reach. There's something that's beyond you. It's outside of you. It's beyond you. But the Eibush gave us a brain, and the brain allows us to go to spaces with our own senses we cannot go, and to reach things that are beyond our conscious mind. And the way I framed it in the class was, there are 5 senses, right? Seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. Now, Lahav Elef Avdal, the way it works in the animal kingdom, is the most primitive animals their primary sense is the tactile sense. That means the sense of touch. And they touch with their whiskers, they touch with their noses, they touch with all kinds of different ways, but they're very sensitive to the environment by the sense of touch. Now, of course, as I explained it to you in class, that if the only sense you have is a sense of touch, that touch becomes very developed. And you see it by people too. Chas v'sholom, people who go blind, or were born blind, they can feel, you give them a piece of paper or a surface, they can feel detail that a seeing person would never notice, because when you have higher senses, the lower senses don't get as well developed. So we have 5 senses. So the most primitive animals, lahavlel vavdalis, use the tactile sense, touch. More sophisticated animals use either smell or taste, and it's hard to know how you separate that in Torah. But I will tell you this, according to Torah, smell, l'chayre, is higher than taste. Smell is the sense that's considered to makif. And of course, above that is the audio sense to hear things. And the highest, most sophisticated sense is considered the sense of video, of vision, the visual sense, be able to see things. Especially if you have 2 eyes and they're facing forward. As opposed to animals who have their eyes on the sides of their heads, so they can see what's going on around them. You have 2 eyes facing the same direction, it's called binocular vision. It allows you to measure distances. The reason you know how far away something is from you, if you had 1 eye, an elephant that's further away wouldn't seem further away, it would just seem smaller. An elephant which is closer to you wouldn't seem closer, it would seem bigger. Because you have 2 eyes, and they're slightly apart, together they create a map, like a geometrical system, that helps you figure out not just what you're seeing, but how big it is and how far away it is from you. Animals have their eyes on the sides of their heads, so they can see the boogeyman coming up from behind them, cannot see the same thing with both eyes, and therefore they don't have that ability. That's just the way it works. So the highest sense is the koychet iya, and human beings, lahavu. And simians and monkeys, I'm not supposed to say that because we're supposed to not even give a Machon, rochek b'yosef, that idea called evolution, use their eyes.
You could just use another
Huh?
animal. You could just use another animal.
Use another animal that has binocular, which other animal has binocular vision? Cats, predators, not the prey, but the predators. Point well taken. So the way it works is, if your higher senses work, your lower senses don't work as well. If your higher senses don't work so well, your lower senses develop automatically. And it doesn't take 1,000,000 generations. It takes a snap of a finger. And I gave you yesterday the example, I saw this in a magazine, a science magazine, that there are human beings who have extraordinary smell, which is one of the lowest of the senses. They have incredibly well-developed olfactory sense, and the reason is they live in jungles, which is very dense, so you can't see very far. And for some reason, there's so much noise that they can't even use the audio sense. In other words, you put people in an environment which is known for people, we use our eyes more than anything else. And if our eyes fail us, we use our ears. But if you put human beings in an environment where the eyes cannot help you ascertain what's going on around you, and your ears cannot help you ascertain, in a very, very short amount of time, people develop the kush hareach. And if they're blind, and their smell doesn't work, they can develop even the tactile sense. The Eibishter made all living things with 5 senses, and each one is strong in one or the other or several, and if one fails, the other one compensates. That's the Eibishter made it. But there's a limitation. The senses only allow you to know things through the 5 senses, which means you have to be close enough to you either to be able to see it, or to be able to hear it, or to be able to smell and taste, or be able to touch. The brain can know things that you can neither see, nor hear, nor smell, nor taste, nor touch. How? Because the brain uses what the 5 senses inform it to deduce. Because of what I see, then there's something that I'm not seeing, and I'd like to know what it is. I gave you the example from seeing the exoplanets, that there's a star that's, I don't know, I gave you the number 4 light years away, which is very far, but 40 light years away, 100 light years away, and we speak about millions of light years and billions of light years. The numbers are so staggering. We can't fathom how big the universe is. We have no ability to understand how. I once read a woman, a scientist, a physicist, who studies astronomy. She says, every once in a while I write it out in longhand. How many zeros do you have to put after the 1 to describe the size of the universe just in miles? It won't fit on a page. I just want to see how big it is. It's just unbelievable. The Eibishter's world is gigantic. And the closest star is very, very far away from us. Very, very far away from us. and yet they're able to see a planet around that star, not because they can see it physically, it's impossible. Because they see that planet's effect on the star. See, an animal can't do that. Why? Because he can't see it. But a human being has a mind. That's called hasaga. Without the Hubble, we wouldn't even see the wobble. And by the way, Hubble is the old one.
Yeah.
There's a new telescope. What's it called? James Webb. And you should know they're finding out things that are extraordinary. That I think it's going to make scientists rethink the age of the universe. Scientists have this idea that the further back in space you look, the further back in time you're looking, which makes sense actually. So there's something called the horizon, the edge of the visible universe. You know, they know how big it is. And that's why they believe that there's a beginning, what they call a Big Bang. And they also have an assumption about how much time it takes for the first stars and galaxies to form. And they used to look back to what they call the deep space, the red shift, there's a word they use for it, and they would see very primitive galaxies, things that are very, very simple. With this new telescope, they're going back to the edge of the universe, and they're seeing that the stars and the galaxies form much faster than they should have based on their mathematics. Happen much more quickly, much more quickly, which makes them, I think, rethink everything. But the only reason they see the wobble is because of these telescopes. These telescopes are amazing. They're extraordinary. Go ahead.
And a much more right in front of his example, I could say that I could technically speaking see the rest of this chair even though I can't even
Correct.
see it because I know what the chair looks like.
Correct, right. But an animal can do that too. Because animals are not that dumb. Right? If an animal has seen a chair yesterday, he can remember that he saw a chair yesterday. But if an animal never saw a chair, he would never have that deduction to be able to see something he's never seen. A person can. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's called hasaga. I mean, intellectual reach. The brain gives you a hand that allows you to reach things that you cannot see, that you cannot hear, you cannot smell, you cannot touch. Of course, you only know it using the five senses. You start off using the senses. The senses inform you of your environment. The senses also leave you with questions. Things about your environment that don't make sense. And the things about the environment that don't make sense help you figure out stuff that you cannot see. And the first step in that is called hasaga. Chayamaya. Come ahead. Take a page. And did you learn in school? You go to school?
What?
Did you learn in school? Mm-hmm. So you know how to write. So write. I mean, some of the guys that never went to school, those guys I can't help it. If you never went to school, maybe the Vikings. Und the Breslever, was can man mit sie machen? But the rest of us, if you learned in school, you're not to write, you should write. Okay, so that's the answer to question 83. Hasaga means to reach, and the concept is that you're using your mind to ascertain, to get to know stuff, pardon for using the bad word, that you can't see, hear, smell, taste, or touch based on what the senses tell you. So you're reaching beyond the horizon of your five senses, using the koyach haseichel that the Eibishter gave you. So the first thing you want to do is see it. That's called reaching. Number 84, explain the second. Then you want to grasp it. Now grasp it is a wonderful idea, and I talked about it yesterday quite clearly, I thought. When you want to know an idea, the first thing you want to do is hold its perimeter, or its parameters, its borders. The Hebrew word is ktsavat, kuf, tzadik, vov, vov, tov. When you grasp an idea, when you're beginning to learn an idea, the first thing you want to say is what it's not. Like I gave you the example yesterday. If you're talking about Atzilus, the first thing you want to say is it's not above Atzilus, it's not below Atzilus. You don't know what it is, but you know at least in what box it is, in what mishbetzes, in what frame it exists. By putting it into a frame, or putting it into a box, we don't understand it, but we narrow down what it is we need to understand. And that becomes the second step. Someone is trying to call me and you're bothering me with the vibrations. I'm teaching. Is this an emergency? No, go upstairs and knock on the door. So? She's probably leaking under the floor. It's very simple. So tell her to put the curtain inside the shower. You don't need a plumber, you need common sense. Sorry, I'm in the middle of a class. Okay, sorry. First, make sure that she's not letting water fall on the floor of the bathroom before you call a plumber. Okay. Pouring down, it's slam, knock on the door. It's probably a broken pipe. If it's pouring down, it's probably a broken pipe. I have to turn off the water or something. Domestica. Sorry, people. Ay. You with me? So the first step is called hasaga, reaching. The second step is called tfisa. Tfisa means you're trying to understand something that you can't see. So you want to limit, you want to say what it's not. You want to put it into a box, right? To use the example that I gave you yesterday, if you see a wobble of a star, so if you see a star that's not making normal rotation, it's not moving the way the star is expected to move, there's something else that's pulling on that star that's giving that star its wobble, its funny movement, right? So what's the first thing you're going to assume? If you see a star that's in a wobble, you're going to assume that there's another star that's also as massive as the first star, and they're pulling on each other. But if you determine there is no other star, so you say, okay, so there's got to be something else. There's some kinds of stars, right? There's what do they call it? A brown dwarf, and a red dwarf, and a white dwarf, and a neutron star. There's other options. There's other possibilities. And if you can eliminate all those possibilities, then you say, if it's not a star of one sort or another, then maybe it's a planet. You understand? So that will be tfisa. You're putting a border on. You're saying what it's not. And by saying what it's not, you're coming a lot closer to what it is. So the word tfisa means to hold. Hold means to hold the edges. You cannot hold something in the middle. You understand? I'm holding this phone because the width of this phone is a centimeter. If the width of this phone was 10 feet, I couldn't hold it. It's too big for my hand to grip, to grasp, to hold. So holding is by definition the borders. You hold the edges of something. So tfisa means to find the edges of an idea and say, I don't know what it is, but I know for sure it's not here and it's not here. It's someplace in between. And I told you yesterday, word from my father's line gesund. I love to repeat these things because these vetala are going to be lost forever. And I have an opportunity to repeat them. My father heard from Rabbi Jacobson. There was a chassid in New York, his name is Rabbi Yossi Jacobson. He's one of the most important Lubavitch chassidim in America. Mamish. The most important. He came to this country in 1926, Tafresh Pei-Vav. He was instrumental in saving the Frierdiker Rebbe's life 1 year later in Tafresh Pei-Zayin. And he set the groundwork for the Rebbe to come here. He learned Chassidus with Bacharim, he sent them to Atvatsk. Everything that happened in America in those early years, Rabbi Jacobson was deeply involved. He was head of the Beis Rivka. He was a big chassid. He sold the Sregim. That was what we know him for. Oh. But he had a very special relation with the Frierdiker Rebbe. And on top of all the other things that he did, he was also the Mashpia in Yeshiva. Esra'igim. The Rebbe's esrei that the Rebbe used, the Pashtas came from Rabbi Jacobson. And Rabbi Jacobs passed away. He came from his son-in-law.
Shouldn't cost more than $10.
Rabbi, his name is Rabbi...
No reason it should cost more than $10.
All time.
Such stuff.
Just let me know when you're done. I want to continue the shir. Venting is very important. If you interrupt the vent, it can be a pekuach nefesh. Just let me when you finish it. So the Frierdiker Rebbe, he was mashpia. He taught Chassidus. And you should know, he started Adat HaTorah. He started the first Balchuva Yeshiva. He started. And the early boys from Adat HaTorah learned by him. He was a guy who didn't sleep. He worked 24 hours a day. When I was a kid growing up, he lived on Montgomery Street, between Albany and Troy, and you walk by his house, there was literally a shingle. Rabbi Israel Jacobson, or Yisrael Jacobson. He was a personality. So the way they described him is at 2 o'clock in the morning, you'd walk into his house, he was holding one phone in this hand, another phone in this hand, and a third phone sitting on the table, having 3 conversations at once. The Bali Tshuva couples that he married off, he would push and counsel them. He was an old chassid from Russia, and he spoke their language. I know his Talmidim, and I've asked them what kind of man he was. He was a chassid. He taught them Kutasai Spilin, taught them about davening. So I once asked one of his chassidim, he had 1,000 jobs, when did he have time for himself? So he told me, Friday night. He didn't sleep Friday night. Friday night, there's no phones. Friday, he sat the whole night and he learned. And I know a woman, I'm not going to say a name because this is a little bit too personal, who was married to a man who was a Talmud of his, who unfortunately did not live long. He passed away. And she said to me that when they got married, he asked her permission not to sleep Friday night, which is a big Mesilas Nefesh. He would stay, because his Rebbe, Rabbi Yossi Jacob, would stay up all Friday night. She told me, my husband stayed up every week Friday night. A ganze Nacht. Anyway, so he was a mashpia. So the Frierdiker once said to him in the Yechidus, Yisro, he didn't say Rebbe, Yisro, Mishbitzais, put away the phone please, the book please. Yisro, Mishbitzais. What Mishbitzais means? Borders. When you teach Chassidus to the boys, give it edges. Don't just speak philosophy in the air. Put it in a box. Put it in a space that the kids have a context. You understand? And that's called tfisa. The second step of pursuing an idea is knowing its borders. Number 3, this is question 85 now. The third, go ahead. Chaim Shnei Ezal Mishlita.
We told you that you have to have word.
The Frierdiker Rebbe told Rabbi Yisrael Jacobs that a Yechidus, and I heard it from my father, Yisrael, Mishpitzais, Mem Shin Beis Tzadik Vav Sof. It's a word in Pashas Tetzaveh, that the stones on the Choshen and the Ephod were surrounded by gold, and the Pasuk's word is Mishpitzais. Frame it, because when you frame it, you limit it, and when you make it limited, it's easier for people to grasp. That's what tfisa means, to grasp. Number 3, iyun. After you reach for the stars, figuratively and literally, and after you grasp the borders of it because you know what it is and what it isn't, now you examine it. What is it? Once I sort of have a sense of it, you try to study it. And one of the most frustrating things about learning in general, and this is of course true also if you're learning, lyhadus, you're learning Torah. You think about those guys looking for planets around the stars, light years away from Earth. It's so indirect. We think, that they put up a telescope and they look through the telescope and they see a planet. It's so not that way. The amount of brain power that is used to make these deductions is extraordinary. They're not seeing it. They're guesstimating it. There's a lot of, it's not guessing, it's educated guessing, very educated. They're analyzing known data to identify unknown data. It's a very, very abstract process. It's a very, very involved and it's an abstract process. You're Forkash, right?
Yeah.
What's your first name?
Zalman.
I can assume Shnei Zalman.
Zalman Lake.
No, Zalman Leib. My father was a Talmud of Zalman Leib in 1946 in Moscow. Listen to this, Zalman Leib. My father was born and raised in Moscow. Okay? His Zayda was a Yisrael Nevelet, a famous chassid who lived in Tashkent. My grandfather, my father's father, worked for the central bank and he had to travel. When he traveled, he took his 3 little kids. He had no wife. He was an alman. He took his 3 little kids and he deposited them by the Zayda and Baba. And my father lived by his grandparents for about a half a year. And during that half a year, he was the Cheder of Zalman Leib Stone, after whom you're named. And there was different classes, different ages. And you looked at each age separately. Somebody was learning with a different age. My father was all of 6 or 7. One boy sat by the window to look out to see if people were coming. My father was a very respectful kid. And it was his job. He was all of 6 or 7. He was looking out the window and he's eating lunch. The Malamed is learning with other children. And he sees a couple walking towards the house. And he they look like such a beautiful couple, looks like nice people. And he's weighing back and forth, should he say something, should he not say something? Anyway, finally, my father says, I was told to say, yeah? So he blurts out, they're coming. In a split second, all the Svarim disappeared. They took out all these different games. And the kids are playing on the floor, and Zalman Leib, Dain Delta Zayder, who was on crutches, it was after the war, was supervising. The couple walked in, they looked around, beautiful children, and they said, you're playing, my father says it in Russian, Santa Claus, because Yazayder Agreis Abad. Mr. wasn't white then. And they left. It took my father a long time to realize what just happened, you know what I'm saying? 25 years later, your grandfather left Russia. He came to the Rebbe. It was the early 70s. My father was married already. My father sees him with the crutches and the casket. So after Ma'ariv, he walks up to your Zayda, Yalta Zayda, after whom your name, and he tells him Shalom Aleichem. Now, when my father saw him last, my father was a little boy. You know, the Yosef Atzadik, without a beard. He was a kid. As soon as your grandfather saw my father, he says, Abba, du gedenkst, hast mir geraten mit dem Leben. Abba, you remember you saved my life. Oh, that's a story. See, we can't pay that price to be Jewish. We can't. We can't. It's easy. Because it's easy, you know what happens. It becomes peasy, easy peasy. It's a different test. It's a different test. Thank God for our test. But this is a story of the person after whom you name. My father was interviewed by Jem yesterday, and this is one of the stories that he told. This is my friend. Okay, Iyun means. So I was talking about the stars. Yeah, they don't. They know. Physically, they see very little, but they have a lot of chokhmah. There's a lot of chokhmah. There's so much developed knowledge. You know, chokhmah yesh b'umis tamin. There's so much chokhmah in physics. They see. You know what it means? They can look at a planet that they can't even see, but they can see its light for all kinds of ways and reasons, and tell you what it's made out of. What's its chemical composition? Which atoms dominate that? It's amazing what they can see from light years away. It's so indirect. There's so much calculating. There's so little, you know, people imagine they're seeing pictures of planets, not saying anything. But there's so much chokhmah. There's so much chokhmah in the process. Hasaga means you reach for it. Tfisa means you put borders on it, what it's not. Iyur means let's figure out what it is. Now I started to say, the hardest part about any learning, especially Torah, is you never really know it all. There's no such thing as there's no more questions. There's no such thing. Or as they say in Brooklyn, there's no such a thing. You know, no such a thing. You never finish. But that doesn't mean you shouldn't try. In every field of knowledge, that's what Chachamim are doing. They have a saga, they have tfisa, and they have Iyun. Iyun means how much can I know? And of course, since there's never I know everything, you're not even sure that what you know, you're knowing correctly, because maybe the parts that you're not informed of yet are going to change what you know. Like I just mentioned to him before, the Hubble allowed us to see the early universe, and it looked very, very scant. There were very few, galaxies, and they were very, very small, and all these kinds of things. This new telescope is allowing us to see more. And we're going back to the early universe, and we're seeing that very, very early out of the universe, according to the Goyish idea that it happened over time, right? We say it happened in a minute. But they see it very, very quickly. There were very, very large galaxies, which speaks well for the idea that it happened in a rapid way rather than in a gradual way. In other words, the way Torah describes creation, lahav lavdaz, versus the way the scientists want to explain it to happen very slowly, in steps. But that's a different discussion. Iyun means how much can I know? Tfisa means what is it not? What is its borders? How much can I know? How much can I know? Can I know how big is it? Can I know how massive it is? In other words, how much volume, how much area did it speak of? Can I know how dense it is? How much gravity it has? Can I know what it's made of? Can I know how close to the parent star it is? These are questions. And sometimes you know more, and sometimes you know less. And the more chokhmah they have, and of course the better the tools they create, they're able to know more and more. But they never know everything. Scientists don't even know everything about the earth. We know as much as we know that there's so much more still to learn. 100 years ago, a famous scientist said, more than 100 years ago, whatever is to be discovered has already been discovered. A long time ago, people said, we know everything already. But they got over that, man. They got over that big time. You know, with the onset of new physics. We know how little we know. But it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. It doesn't mean you should know as much as you could know. That's called iyun. It means to examine the details of what it is you want to know. Tfisa puts borders on it, but it's not. And iyun is examining itself. And then comes the fourth step, question 86, havchana. The English translation of the word havchana is to discern. D-I-S-C-E-R. That means to separate. To separate. to dissect, to take apart. When you understand something well, you understand its detail. And understanding its detail is about separating the details from one another. And for this, I gave you the example from the flower. Right? The flower is a beautiful thing. But a flower is living. And to be living has to have many, many, many basic criteria and many, many specific criteria. It's amazing what David created. It's amazing. You know what's amazing also? That he made it so small. The smallest living things are so tiny. We have no fathom how small they are. But they're alive. They have all the rules of a living thing. What's a living thing? Number one, it has an envelope, a wall, a skin that separates from its environment. It's protected from the world around it. Number two, that skin is porous. Things can come in from the environment and things can go out from it into the environment in a controlled way. Right? Number three, it's able to take in food and process it and digest it and create energy and body parts that it can renew. Correct? And the last thing and the most important thing is it can have babies. If you don't have those rules, you're not alive. Flowers in biology are living. Like I told you, the Rishonim, Rabbi Chaya, he calls animals chai and he calls plants koyach, which is energy. But scientifically, a flower is alive. It has many parts. Number one, it's separate from its environment. Number two, it takes in and gives out from its environment. Number three, it uses the food that it takes in to create energy and body parts for its own life cycle. And finally, it has babies. It reproduces. So when you look at a flower, it's beautiful. Right? When you grasp a flower, what do you know? It's not an animal, it's a plant. It's not this kind of plant, it's this kind of plant. Everything in the world can be divided up into families. If you study it. Even rocks. Do you know that? Geology, there's many, many different kinds of rocks. And in science, there's a whole study of these rocks are cousins, and these rocks are second cousins, and third cousins, and distant cousins.
It's just connected to the ground, so it's just something, it's just part of the ground. It's not its own separate thing.
Whatever you say, man. So we're connected to the earth also. We just walk from place to place, but we're stuck on the earth also.
No, but we're not
I'm not having this argument, Mr. Shmuel. A living thing is defined as living by being distinct from its environment. Flowers are not connected. They're connected to the ground, but they're separate from the second flower, the third flower, the fourth flower, and the honeybee, and the insect, and the parasite, and all the chevra want to eat them up, and so on and so forth. And they have defenses. It's a whole game. Every living thing keeps itself alive by fighting off bugs and vermin. And so, the more you study it, the more you say amazing. It's mamish unbelievable. Amazing. But flowers are beautiful. So you reach for a flower, you grasp a flower by saying what it's not. It's in this family, not in this family. It's a plant and not an animal. It's this kind of plant and not this kind of plant. And then you want to examine what you can know about it. And then you can separate. This is the part of the flower that protects it from its environment. This is the part of the flower that serves the purposes of taking in and giving out. This is the part of the flower that identifies which food is good for it and takes it in, and which food is bad for it and it rejects it. This is the part of the flower that takes that food and breaks it down. It makes it into compound parts. Number one, to provide energy for the flower, chayes, koyach, and number two, to provide cell parts to create the flower's renewal. And this is the part of the flower that has babies. So you take a flower, it stops being beautiful. It becomes very scientific. It becomes very, very technical. You understand? So that's havchana. After you examine and you ask yourself, what can I know? Havchana means to separate. And the last step, question 87, is bina, to understand. And to understand means to put it back together. To understand the unity of it. I'll get to you in a second, Adam Levy. And the way I explain this to you, and I think it's a good way of explaining it, is you must appreciate the philosophical difference between Torah and science. It's an axiomatic philosophical, it's a very important difference. Science believes in evolution. Evolution means, number one, life came from not life. Literally, they believe that, which makes very little sense. And if you read people who are honest about it, I have a book at home from a man who was a science editor for many, many years. He writes, evolution could be true, but 15 billion years is not nearly enough time. It's not nearly enough time for all the things that need to happen for life to develop from non-life to life. But then they say from primitive life you have advanced life. from single-celled organism to complex organism. You know that there's a theory in every living cell, there's something called a mitochondria. The mitochondria is the battery, it's the furnace. There is a belief that mitochondria used to be separate cells, and a bigger cell swallowed the mitochondria and it became a piece of it. There's a scientific theory like that. So from smaller cells you have big cells. So what's a flower? What's a flower? Little cells connecting to other cells create more complex and more complex until the flower forms. Huh? I can't hear you.
I was just saying science words. It's like chloroplast.
Chloroplast is a part of every cell.
Yeah.
I think it's like the energy part or something or other. But okay. But the point is, if you believe in evolution, the key to evolution is single cells. The complexity of cells is a secondary process. So a flower is first of all individual cells that happened over time to become a flower. But if you believe in Torah, you believe God created flowers. He created peaches. He created apples. He created people, a hagel. You understand? Let me give you a beautiful insight. A beautiful insight, right? Why are fruit beautiful, colorful, and tasty?
So eat it.
Why are fruit beautiful, colorful, and tasty? Depends who you ask. If you ask a scientist, the answer is very simple. Because every tree wants to have babies. But as Reb Shmuel said, trees have a problem. They're stuck to the ground. So they have to send their seed away without walking over there because they can't move. So they produce something which has a very high energy cost. It's expensive for the tree to produce fruit. And they make a big announcement, please come and eat me. Now there's a rule in science that says, and in common sense it says, in lyhadus it says, nothing wants to be eaten. The exception to that rule is nectar and flowers and fruit. Why? The tree produces fruit, which is expensive for the tree, and the fruits are tasty and beautiful and colorful and very easy to see, and the animals come and eat it, and they eat it with the seeds. It goes into their gut, they go away, and they drop it. It's reproduction. So the reason trees have fruit, and the fruit are announcing themselves, eat me, right? Leaves on a tree are built with all kinds of protection. They're very hard to digest. That's why many leaves are toxic, they're poison. There are monkeys who eat different leaves. But they know that if they eat too much of one kind of leaf, it'll poison them and kill them. So they know exactly how many leaves of that type they should eat, and then they don't eat anymore. And they go to a different tree. And the mothers teach these to the baby monkeys, from this kind of leaf you can eat so many leaves per day, you eat too much, it's going to poison you. And they don't even speak to each other. In other words, they all have defenses, except for peaches and plums and apples. They say, please come and eat me. And they drip nectar, honey. Why? Because they want you to send the fruit. That's how scientists explain it. It's a beautiful explanation. And it's true also. What does Teda say? What does Teda say? The Eibishter made the world for people. And he doesn't want people only to survive. He wants people to have pleasure. So he made things that are beautiful and tasty. Like they say in the world, what is nature's candy? Fresh fruit. Now who's right? They're not mutually exclusive. They're not a contradiction. But they speak to what is the world. If you believe in evolution, the world is about surviving.
One explains how, one explains what.
One explains
Yeah,
a world without a purpose, and one explains a world with a purpose. If the world is here just to stay alive, fruits are here to have babies. But if worlds are here to create beauty and pleasure, we make a bracha in Chedesh Nisan. And it says in Sefer HaMenhagim, it says in the Yom Yom that we make this bracha. Birchas Eilonis. Right, you go out in the month of Nisan, you see a tree that bears fruit, and it has blossoms, you can make a bracha. That the Eibishter created beautiful trees and beautiful things. Leihana is behem b'nei Adam. This is a bracha, and you should know the brachas go back to the Anshe Kesed HaGedolah, to give people pleasure. So a scientist looks at a fruit and he sees a bunch of cells that came together. A Yid looks at a fruit and says the Eibishter made beautiful for him to look at and have pleasure from. They're not a contradiction, but they're two different things. Bina means to understand the essence of the flower. Now the scientist also understands the essence of the flower, but he understands it on a scientific level, on a biological level, on an evolutionary level. A Yid looks at a flower and understands that the Eibishter made the world. Tacha Oretz Desha Esav. You speak Hebrew. The Eibishter made the earth to be blanketed by grass. That's what the word Desha means. Esav, but it's blanketed by different types of grass. Over here, this kind of grass grows. Over here, this kind of grass grows. And it all adds up to a beautiful world. So, this is the fifth step in understanding. The fifth step in understanding is to understand the totality of the flower. And on a higher level, to understand why Hashem made this flower. Not how he made this flower, but why he made this flower. Well, the 5 steps. This was yesterday's class, and today we repeated it a second time. Hasaga, you reach for it. Tfisa, you know its borders. Iyun, you examine it. Havchana, you separate the different aspects within it that you're able to know. And as I said to you before, the hardest part of learning is that you never really know. That's really the truth. You don't know everything ever. There's always more. And Havana means, okay, let's understand what it is. Questions or comments? Go ahead. I'm sorry, I'll let you go.
You said that Iyun is the idea of like examining it in its details.
Right.
So wouldn't it make sense for Achana to come before Iyun, so you can break the idea into its parts and then examine it in its details?
Okay, first of all, maybe. I made up this order. But I see Havchana as the continuation of Iyun. But yeah, it's whatever works for you. You're examining it to identify the details, and when you identify the details, you examine them. So, Iyun Kloli and Iyun Prati. I just love the word of Havchana. In English, it's discern, to separate. That's the, okay. Any other questions or comments? Hold on a second. David Yankiv. Havana means to understand. Havana means to understand. And I just tell you that in the Zohar that we say out of Shabbos, Yankiv, Kovi, we say Bina, Liba. Chochma Moicha, Bina, Liba. You remember that? You say Pascha on Fridays? You know what that is?
Yeah,
It's the long, small type. You're supposed to say it every Friday. Chochma Moicha. Chochma is the brain. Bina, Liba. Bina is the heart. And the question is asked 1,000 times. It's not true. Bina is the left side of the brain. It's not the heart. And this is the answer. Because Bina takes everything apart and puts it back together, it shows you its beauty. So even though it's intellectual, it's heart-like. When you're understanding something, because it's after it finishes going through all the details, it makes it into a composite, into a single point, and sees the whole thing of it as a singularity, which is similar to the heart, because the heart also feels that way. Hearts don't separate, hearts react. I like to say the difference in the brain and the heart is different between fingers and a fist. Fingers are dexterous, right? They can manipulate, they have fine motor capacity, right? A fist or a hoof or a paw is much stronger than the human finger, correct? But it can't manipulate. If you have a cat's paw or an ungulate's hoof, and so on and so forth, so it's stronger, but it's not as sophisticated. The finger separates. It separates. The heart is like a fist. The brain is like fingers. The end of understanding is bringing it back to a point. So in this respect, it's like the heart. Okay, so we did in 2 days was cover all 5 of these, which is a miracle, and tomorrow we'll go back to the